birds. So it's not only just here, up and out throughout California. The California distribution itself is dense shrub, but it's also called soft chaparral. And that soft chaparral is really a lot of what we have here, along with and included in the coastal sage scrub community. The animals we'll be speaking about today are the gray fox, the red fox, the raccoon, the opossum, the skunk, the coyote, and a couple of little small players that we'll add in. The pocket gopher, possibly the rabbit and the cottontail, and the ground squirrel if we have some time. So we see these guys, they're pretty much frequented throughout our environments, whether it's above or below. We have variations of behaviors from them that they've all adapted to, and they are continuing to evolve and adapt even more so, more now that our environments are changing. They have to adapt and change to survive and navigate through the systems as well. The map shows the concept of the landscape, but it's also, if you can just visualize for a minute, the transverse of the animals. So the gray fox would be up throughout the top. The raccoon is through most of California, the striped skunk and the opossum as well. Those 2 or 3 would be concentrated more where there is coastal areas, waters. So you would really find them prevalent in wetlands and marshes, and again here off our coastline, the rocky shore area. Coyotes, foxes, gray and red, you'll find distributed throughout the more denser shrub, the higher thickets, the areas that are important for them in terms of being able to survive and to thrive and to live and hide from urbanization. So one of the issues that is prevalent is that fact that they are coming more and more into our normal settings, our universal neighboring areas. They've been here long before us, so we have to look for ways to all adapt and support each other. The types of the terrestrial mammals fall into categories of herbivore, granivore, insectivore, carnivore, invertivore, omnivore, folivore, and frugivore. And those are mentioned because scientifically, what's currently happening is they want to move away from just the word omnivore, because these animals are adapting so much to the I just shared how it's evolving. They are now having to become an insectivore or a granivore or a herbivore where they weren't before. Although most have dentia or molars or teeth that are allowing them to adapt to the food, it's not always the case. So their digestive systems are also at play. Only certain things can be digested. So those are all factors that we're looking at in terms of the behavior and the growth and the spans of the animals themselves. So for the coyote, their trophic level or their diet is an omnivore, but as I mentioned, they're into eating everything. So they're starting to scavenge as why we see them. If we have a higher drought period and everything's dried up, they are not going to have the food source that they need. If they're not going to have the food source that they are required to thrive in, they then cannot produce and have more kids. Fine, most people would feel, but for them, that is an important part of their transversing. So they need to have food. They have to come down and get it. So what do they look for? Cats, mainly. Not as often as people would think. They are now starting to show this behavior, but they're interested in just scavenging like a raccoon or a skunk would do, or a possum. They are finding trash. They're finding your vegetables. They're finding the dead fruit falling from your trees. They're doing all of these things because they are just plain hungry. If they end up finding a cat or a small dog, they're becoming a little more brazen because they're becoming habituated into being closer to humans. Humans are leaving food out. Humans are not taking things away. They're getting more comfortable, and they are great jumpers. With that height variation, they are able to jump over fences, which we have been hearing a lot about. Not as many attacks, but there have been new attacks on small children because they're running or scurrying like a small animal would be doing, and so they just see a small movement and easily believe it might be a rabbit or a small dog. The anatomy is built for that movement and that mobility. Their pointed ears and narrow muzzle is great for the sensories that they have. Their pointed ears and wide ability to hear is essential. As with many of the animals we'll talk about, they've developed these senses in order to thrive within the environments that they reside. So if they have a pointed ear that hears great distances, they're going to be needing to hear small animals, small movement. Their tail between their legs when in running is a balanced part of their behavior, and their slender legs are built for that agility and speed, upwards of 43 miles per hour. I'm going to try and give you a sense of their sound. Let's see if it'll work. Although we've been hearing a lot more than usual. Is that coming through? So the ability to be able to do that loud sound is essential for them in communicating. It's not always just to let others know there's food that they have. Those will be high-pitched shrills. They have been known to start packing up a little bit more often than they used to. They primarily were solitary environmental animals looking for just that specific environment, but they are now starting to work in groups. Or if a mom has her kids and they're growing, she then essentially will be teaching them, and those are some of those calls that you hear. The next animal we're going to move to is the red fox. Now, although I haven't seen one in quite a while, I've seen them running from the golf course near me, running down the street, hiding in people's yards, and people kind of going, what are they? Who are they? What do I need to do? They're very sweet little foxes, and they are scavenging as well. They're probably going to just be eating some of that fruit, some of the plants, some of the berries as well. So they're adapting to environments for their food. Although they're an omnivore, they are notorious for eating small lizards and insects as well. They have a very short lifespan in the wild. As with many of these animals, their lifespans will triple in captivity. And unfortunately, they don't have a long life in terms of their kits. Their young kits will be preyed upon by larger animals and or humans, because we're driving around and not seeing the little guys, and they can get run over, as with many of the animals. Their speed is pretty quick as well, and their height is a little smaller, although their mass, they can be upwards of 30 pounds, which is quite considerable for such a small little fox. Their large pointy ears are essential for their ability to hear that ticking of a small watch in adjacent to anywhere from 40 to 120 feet. That's pretty impressive. Their senses, their hearing, their vertical islets, which is very different from the coyote or the gray fox, have oval eyes. They are also able to adapt to their environments that the small animals reside in. So if those little animals that they're going to eat are doing these small little movements, that's essential to the large, pointy, upright ears that a red fox would have, because in essence, they are adapting to each other's environments. They've grown and become accustomed to that environment. So therefore, it's not any accident that the animals that they pursue are small. And another point to that is they are not a pack animal. They are a solitary hunter. They're small in stature. So if they are going to be hunting for a very small portion of food, be it a squirrel, a rabbit, they're not going to want to share that. They will, however, cache it, which is hide it away, store it for a later time. Their black legs and long, sharp claws are essential. They've learned to jump, not climb, as one of the other foxes that we'll talk about. And their telltale white tip is important too when they're running off. That's one of the points that you will see about them, is to tell the difference. Different times of the year, their coloring may be a little off, and so a lot of people will think that they're a gray fox versus a red. Their white tip tail is what you'll look for as a signifier. With a gray fox, it would be a black stripe. One of the things that's important about understanding their movement and how they've adapted is some of their strategies. They are known to flee and expel or vomit like some sea animals can do. Their hunting ability is really important, and it's actually really quite interesting that they can backtrack and hide from predators. That's pretty tricky. That's going back to the initial name of trickster for the coyote. It seems the red fox is adapted to that. They also are, as the other foxes in the family, the canid family, they're high or vertical jumpers. So 6 feet is pretty impressive for that small fox. And they're also able to run through water to cover the scent if they are essentially being chased for a protective measure. The next fox is our gray fox. So that telling tail I spoke of, that black marking all the way down, those are what are called guard hairs. And the guard hairs are a really important part of not only identifying them, but protection. They have the ability to pull off water, to guard from sun, to protect, and also stand up. Think about your cat or dog. The hairs that stand up on their body are guard hairs. That's part of the fur or the pelage or pelage, however you'd like to pronounce it, of their body, their fur. Their trophic level is an omnivore, although they are now moving into those other categories of insectivore and frugivore, and those are parts of their life. They are, although able to eat everything for the most part, they do eat quite a bit of insects or snakes. They maintain our rodent population. So they are crepuscular, which is dusk, dawn. Although they can be seen throughout the afternoon, it's typically because they may have kids that they're protecting and feeding. And those are things to keep in mind. 180 days is a very short span. It's not a lot of time for them. So therefore we don't see very many. They do get preyed upon. They have those large coyotes that can sometimes take them down, or their kids. Their mother and kit here is either she's going to be called the vixen, dad will be the Todd or the male, or dog fox is really their recognized name. And it's not improper to call them cubs, pups, or kits. They are all fall into these categories. As they grow, they can evolve from the kit to the cub to the pup. They also have those long pointed ears and that pointed nose, and the oval pupils, which are they're not a yellow eye like with the red fox, and also a variation of those guard hairs that I mentioned go from the back to the tail, all throughout that tail, but the back stripe, although it's at the top, it has also been seen all the way up into the hips. The top coloring, the peppering, is essential for them in their ability to hide and camouflage. And most animals that we're speaking of, if you really look at all of their behaviors, that's the essential aspect to it. They're built for their environments. The coastal sage scrub, the chaparral, the dense shrub, all have these mimicking colors. And all of these animals tend to look and be able to blend into these environments. They may not be green, but they're literally able to hide in open thickets. It's pretty amazing when you think about what they have to endure and go through. The next animal is our raccoon, and they are pretty important as well in terms of not just their diet and not just the fact that they're these cute little critters, but they're also maintaining environments for us. They're helping to keep some of the bugs and the issues you might have in your gardens down, as with the larger animals we spoke of that are maintaining the control of rats and mice and small animals. These guys are also doing that with roaches and ticks and other animals that maybe are infesting environments that you don't want them in. And they're an important part. They have really unusual benefits with their hands, as the gray fox we spoke of. They mentioned that they were climbers. They have retractable claws like a cat. They have sensitive pads as well, and their pads are essential to their name, he who scratches, or their Indian name is it who scratches, and they're always touching and moving their hands together. It's not uncommon to see them near the water, sitting upright in the water, moving their hands back and forth. It's not true that they're washing their food. They're cleaning it off, but their sensory pads are helping them understand the type of food that it is. They are medium-sized, and they are in ranges all the way from mountains to our coastal marshes, as I mentioned. But 75% of their brain is just the sensory signal devoted to touch. That's incredible. So you think those human-looking hands are an essential part of how they function. They've had that nickname, the bandit, forever. And the idea is the guard markings of those eyes there, that matching little hanky across the eyes, is to protect against the sun, is one point that was mentioned, maybe reduce glare and enhance the night vision. But it's also recognized as possibility of being an identifying marker with other raccoons. So that begs the question, if their sight, is it really that great? Maybe just at night, although you can see them out in the morning. I don't believe they're just more nocturnal, they're crepuscular, because you can see them in the mornings and the evenings at dusk and dawn. You sometimes, again, with the kits, if they have a young, they're taking care of young, they will be out during the day foraging for them. Most of the time they're finding homes in trees around your home or in the sewers. That paw differentiation of the sensories is pretty impressive, but they also have a tail that's impressive. The rings and the fat deposit help them with balance. Their ability to turn inside out inside their fur, their skin, to get away from a predator. They have this baggy coat. They're very thin within that. If you ever really watch, some of our raccoons can get upwards of, look like 30 or 40 pounds. They're ideally supposed to stay in the 20-pound range, but we have some very large raccoons in our area that have gotten very accustomed to human food, and hence we're having some very overweight raccoons. The next animal we have is our striped skunk, and I don't know how many of you have experienced being sprayed, but it is an incredibly arduous ordeal for our animals. They live very short lives. They're very small in stature, and they really don't have any interest in spraying you. It is taxing on their body. It's very difficult, and they're very polite about it. They give you fair warning. They will turn around, they'll stomp, they'll lift their tail, swipe it a couple of times, they'll walk away from you. If they are approached head on, as they have been by my dog, they will then turn around and spray directly in the face of their predator. That is a blinding, oily deposit that is very thick and becomes very smelly very quickly. They're a doe, a buck, or a kit. So those glands are an essential part of their protective mechanism, aren't they? So they will sit on each side, and when they do release that oil, which is called athelos, they will spray it, and it can be anywhere from 2 feet to 13 feet. Some documentation states 20 feet. Either or, it lingers. If you've ever been out walking, now that we're all out at night and in the mornings doing our walks, you can define it very clearly where they've been. The young will not be able to manipulate that as well, so they will just be releasing that, and it could be stronger, the scent will be stronger. The location is important for them, as opposed to another animal that we'll talk about here. She, or he, excuse me, will have scent glands in his chest cavity, up in the front pads, and they will emit that scent. It's an oily, musky scent as well from marking, but it's primarily more in turn for the mate, female, to find them. They also will have glands under their tail, and it's more of a greenish, oily deposit, and that is also a sensory for marking. Although they're known as an omnivore, they are the notorious eater of everything. Venomous snakes, they have a protein that allows them to eat a snake. Although question is whether or not the snake itself, the properties are enough to prevent the opossum. It's pronounced opossum or possum. Both are correct. The snake venom can easily harm them, but there's deposits, there's breakdowns, whether or not there's enough of them that can help the possum later in life, or if it can be an anti-venom created as an anti-venom, or questions. They're able to do quite a few things with that prehensile. They're our only marsupial with a true pocket. And the fact that 93% of that length is their tail. One of the funniest things I found is the fact that it was thought of a folklore story that they actually mated through their nose. I just think that's hilarious, that because it's primarily the body parts that they would use for mating are bifurcated, so they're forked. So there in turn, they thought, oh, it's through the nose. But it was just they happened to notice the possum sniffing and sneezing into her pouch, and then she had babies in there. So they thought, oh, she must have just had them.
Okay.
It's very, very funny. So Captain John Smith was ideally one of the first that recorded findings of this beautiful little animal. And it's also called a white dog in reference to its name. But the initial traits are pretty impressive. The top of the hands, also again, like the raccoon, are looking human-like or primate-like. The nails there for digging are essential for digging. The ambidextrous, that thumb, is really important, as was for the raccoon and is for the raccoon for climbing, crawling, digging. Their food is under the ground. But with an opossum, it's also everywhere. It might be under a tree, it might be up a tree, it might be the leaves. They are becoming more and more foliivore, which is true to their name, as a marsupial. Their whiskers are, the barysae is used for smell and tactile touch, as opposed to the raccoon, which is primarily that tactile touch in their pads. Their teeth are essential as the raccoons that we were looking at. The teeth themselves are aid in supporting that food or that digestive system. They do both have big molars in the back that help them to crush and swallow the leaf systems that are very difficult on the digestive tract. The pouch itself can hold a number of babies. They can have upwards of 50. Most records have shown up to 20. That's a difficult process because here we have 13 to 20 babies and only 13 nipples. The nipples themselves are positioned inside the pouch as a large circle with one nipple in the center and all the others all around. The young will attach themselves to that teat and stay there for upwards of 2 months. Wow. Until they get long and big and strong enough to move on from that. But my question is, what about all those other ones? Where are they going? With all these animals and all the research that's been done about them, what they're discovering more and more is cannibalism. So, and it's more about them protecting either a young that didn't survive, or if with this particular animal, if perhaps one of the young that are on their back are expelled off, they fall off or they don't hang on, they're left behind. Whereas with the raccoon, I've seen them go and pick them up, and a coyote go and pull that kit and bring them. The tail here is important for hanging when they're young. As an adult, it allows them to grip and grab and grasp. It's like an extension or almost an arm. The keratin here, the scale, they are a mammal, so they do have keratin on top of all the different types of awn and fur and guard hairs. This is a buildup of calcium that was just on the top of it. It's not a normal appearance of their tail, but it is an important part to understanding how essential it is as an extension of an arm for them to develop. They're a slow mover. My personal experience, my dog thinks that it's its pal. They are not. They have no interest in us. They don't want to talk about us. They want to move on. They don't want to engage in anything. Many people will keep them as pets or try to keep them as pets, as with some of the younger foxes. So in keeping with that, it's recognizing that they are wild. And if you do find them, there are proper agencies that will take care of them. The eyesight is interesting for them, even though they are low movers, so it would make sense. But that one of the reasons they do get hit quite a bit in the street is because of that. They freeze up. They go into what is called a tonic immobility, and it is feigning death, some say, but it's actually they freeze up and they can go into that state for anywhere from an hour to 6 hours. And some people will think, oh, I'm going to dispose of it, throw it in my trash can, it's dead on my lawn, only to find out that it's knocking at the top of the trash can trying to get out 5 hours later because it's now awake and ready to go. It's a way they protect themselves, and it's an important part for them. I'm going to share a little bit of sound as well, and there's also attached video of young. Let's see if it'll come. as with all of these young animals that we mentioned, they are able to vocalize. So some will do screeches, some will make those growls. They also are capable of hissing. The skunk is able to screech at high tones. The opossum is famous for hissing and clicks when it wants to get attention from its mate. Raccoons are also notorious for their sounds. Let me see if I can go back so you can hear the raccoon sound, which I'm sure you've heard. Screeching sound. You can hear that in the trees sometimes, or if you're out walking and wonder what that is, it's them hiding. So you'll now know the skunks and raccoons are very similar in sound, and they'll be right there in those trees if you're walking around. So keep that in mind if you hear it, and just keep walking so you don't get skunked. The next, or the smallest of our terrestrial mammals, are essential to the area as well. Look at their appearance. It matches much of most of the animals that we mentioned. They're terrestrial in appearance, meaning terra, dirt, land. They hide well. They are visorial. They are semi-ground dwellers, but mostly underground dwellers. The pocket gopher itself, as with all three of these, their teeth will continue to grow their whole life. So it's essential for them to eat the foods that'll help them continue to masticate that food. The pocket gopher actually has pockets, true pockets, that go all the way to the backs and sides of its shoulders. The gopher, the California ground squirrel, excuse me, it has that ability, but it only has these two pockets on the side to take to its dens, to take to the trees, to take to wherever it's caching as well. And the rabbit as well. They have small pockets, but they're very minimal compared to the other two. Pocket gopher will win out every time in terms of where and how and the adaptability. It can create tunnels that are upwards of 2,000 feet and go through a baseball field, a football field, you name it. They're very big and long, which is why many people do not want them in their yards. The California ground squirrel also can colonize. It kind of keeps up with those tunnels as well. It will have its own opening. Every animal in the family will have its own opening, and it can take over just as large of a field span or an acre of land just by hiding and allowing itself to remember where that food is. You'll find them in your balconies, you'll find them in your yards, your apartments or houses or neighboring lawns. They will find places to hide their food and go back to that food. As with many of these animals, the memories that have been tested range between weeks to years in where their food is, so that they can understand how and to continue to survive when it's maybe thinner environmentally and they have to figure out where that food is. The last is the cottontail, and we've been seeing a big abundance of this with the last of the rains that we had and the new growth. They have a zigzagging formation that helps them, as with the chirping maybe that the ground squirrel does to hide. Pocket gopher that also will rarely ever be above ground. It's great when you can see them at Ryan Park digging for those dandelions and taking the whole root down. But the cottontail themselves will cool. I've been watching them, seeing them a lot more, cooling themselves kind of out and about early in the morning, crepuscular as well, and then dusk going to feed. They are competing with all our goats that we have around town. But they are essential to the area because they're an important food bank. All of these animals, big or small, are connected. They're all linked. They are either feeding each other or feeding another, and it's an important part. So whether they're a dweller, fossorial they're called, or a semi-fossorial, which is the California, because they're up in trees as well as grounds, and then the Audubon, the cottontail, is more of a ground dweller. And although these are just simple points and they're very minimal of what we can cover, there's incredible new history about the animals. It's always changing, whether their names should be, their scientific names should be changed. As with the skunk, it's no longer a mustelid, it's in the Methidae family now. But there's ways to identify them, as I shared with all their families of each individual, but their coloring. There are also ways like this, tracks. I showed at each one of the entries a small track figure. Here you have the coyote. They're slightly smaller, narrower. Fox also has fuzzy edges. So one way to see their track is it would be almost a blurred track. That's a fox's track, versus a coyote looks narrower than a dog and a wolf. But it's difficult to tell unless you have them side by side. Most of the other ways to tell any of these gaits that you're not going to be able to see their gait, which is their walking, is through scat. And that's essentially the best way to tell. And here is that old-fashioned scat song. And it's a fun way, whether you're teaching, whether you're sharing with the students, when you're back at the interpretive center, out and about with your grandkids. It's a fun way to help them understand, if you're teaching about the wildlife, what's really happening and how it works. Each scat will be presented differently by what they ate, whether it's furry from the rabbit or tubular for the coyote, because you saw that that was its food, or short and full of berries, maybe it was the raccoon, or it could have been a fox. They're eating a lot of those as well, whether they're berries or fruits of any other kind. It's an important part. There's a lot of things that go into making these and the information that we have, and I hope that it helped you to understand a little bit more about the animals themselves and what they are and how they work in our environments. And it's, you know, and it's an important part of just understanding where we are in terms of our landscape with the peninsula, how rich and the diversity that it offers is for all these little ones that have been here way before us, even though they can be considered a nuisance or cumbersome to some, they each have their own individualized either maternal ability or instinctive behaviors and awarenesses, and how they traverse our area and how they can figure out ways, like the fox, backtracking or hiding or sitting out on your lawn while your dog is sitting right there. There's different things that are going on right now.
Okay, everyone, we'll release the mutes from everyone's mic. So if you want to just unmute your microphone, you're free to ask any questions you may have at this time.
Norma,
Yes.
when did the possum get introduced to California? Is it originally from Virginia?
It actually started out early on in the 1900s as a food source, as with the foxes. They came in. So they were mid 1900s into the 40s. They became really established.
They're there. There's everybody.
That's my food.
You said the 1900s to the 1940s is when it came across with people, or?
1910 era is when they first started seeing more of the Virginia opossum because of the mining they needed. Some stories believe that it was they were hungry. You know, they were missing food from their southern roots.
Right.
They were working in areas that didn't have that kind of food source. So they brought it over for what people do eat them for. You know, possum pie is the thing.
Okay.
It is originally from that era. And then it just kind of has blown up, and it's now all over, I think, with the exception of Alaska. They're everywhere.
Wow. You have another question?
Norma,
Okay.
this is Jim Schneer. On the, I guess it was the gray fox chart, you had indicated that their typical lifespan was 180 days, which seemed incredibly short for a mammal. So I went online, and what I was finding there was 6 years rather than 6 months. Is it possible that your source was erroneous?
No, it's actually a combination of those things, Jim, and that's a really great point. So when you're looking for evidence of any of these animals, it can vary depending on their environment. It could be a short amount of span of days. It could be captivity. It could be in the wild. In the wild, typically, they say that amount of short days, it's because a good percentage of them die very young. And that's from predatory behavior or being hit or disease. They do carry a lot of diseases, as dogs do. They carry a lot of intestinal diseases as well, and they can transfer them to people. So that's one of the things. The most generalized time of living is upwards of 6 years. It's not always the case. As with all these animals, it really depends on their lifestyle. So whether it's a short amount of days or upwards of years. But yes, that's a good question.
Thank you.
Norma,
Yes.
when I take a walk on that median strip up PV Drive North where all the eucalyptus trees are, and there are a ton of holes on the path. Do we assume those are gopher holes? And if they're so long, do you think it's going to get dangerous in walking?
So here's the thing with that. We have quite a number of squirrels. We have an invasive eastern squirrel, we have a red squirrel, we have the fox squirrel. We have these squirrels that are also making those digging holes. Gopher holes, you'll know the telling sign of a gopher hole, it's more kind of U-shaped versus the squirrels that are a deep hole. The squirrels are leaving those colonied holes after a while, and then they're being invaded by the rabbits or the snakes and what have you. Part of, depending on the environment where they are, they can present issues for the landscape, whether we're not in a snowy environment, so that if they were, then we would have problems with the snowbanks. Here, we have some erosion issues. So a lot of those holes and those trails are so long and intricate that it can create issues in the long term for digging or planting. In the open spaces, it then presents problems when we're hiking or walking because that is unstable. And a lot of our land, the earth itself, is a serpentine. So it's very granular and although it's all these different layers of granules that are different shaped, that also is a problem. So you're now looking at instability with erosion, instability because they built these holes. But another one that is the concern is the gopher. Its holes, or the landscape, the land, the amount of dirt and area that it can hit a big acre, but the amount that it leaves, the mounds are the concern there. It's now leaving all these piles upon piles that are creating issues for the growth of everything else. So it gets very intricate. It's very fascinating, and they're amazing little engineers. They're key predators, very key predators.
Norma?
Yes.
An interesting thing about gophers, if you see a gopher hole, that's not where the run is. And you look and you'll see two gopher holes, and then you draw a line between the two and take the midpoint. That's where the run is. They call it the run. And the run is perpendicular to those two holes. If you can picture what I'm doing mathematically.
Mm-hmm.
So if you want to trap them, what you do is you find two holes together, get the midpoint, and you'll find out there's you kind of spear it with a little stick.
Mm-hmm.
You feel it go in, and then you can dig it out and you put the trap in the run.
Mm.
And so you'll never see a gopher, where that hole is. Yeah.
Yeah.
They're very intelligent. I had a 2-month battle with a gopher. And the guy was smarter than I was.
They are pretty amazing, aren't they? And, in looking at a lot of the engineering, I was looking at there was some really great schematics. And just the ones I would like to use, they weren't available for use. They weren't for public usage. They were just in scientific studies that I'd read. But it's amazing, the detail, you're right, the connecting point. And just the ability that they have with those incisors in their front, the claws that they have, all of them, the adaptions that they've all acquired is just, it's mind-blowing, really, when you think about the intricacies of what they have to do to live.
Norma, there was a question from Susan Allowert. Susan, you can clarify, are there opossums in Europe? Is that what your question was?
Yes, that is what I was trying to write, but my fingers don't obey.
There are some. They are starting to see them worldwide. Some of the colder climates have them. I think Hawaii is one of the few places that they haven't been seen as often. So most of the land mammals that we're seeing, that invasive wise, are finding their way. They're transversing across areas that we wouldn't have imagined. And they move at night for miles. They can go 6 miles, 10 miles, 25 miles. So if you think about that with coyotes and with the opossum, they're finding ways to survive further and further because they just don't have that food source. So therein lies the situation. They have to find it. So what are they going to do? They're going to go anywhere and everywhere they can that they can survive. And a good point with the opossums is because they have such poor eyesight, and we see them walking very slow, and they have this very exaggerated, slow wallowing gait, almost like they're drunk, they will end up crossing streets, even though they are stopping in the middle. When I've come on them so many times where they freeze up and you have to get around them, and then that's not always the case. But the young will survive in that pouch. So a good percentage of times when they go to pick up the opossum, they will find young in those pouches that have survived and then have to replace them. It is illegal to trap and remove them. So as with all these animals, so there's different programs in place, but Europe has been showing them. They're a little smaller in stature, they're a little whiter in color, but they are prevalent.
Norma, I know my husband really likes opossums because they eat snails.
Mm.
And he really doesn't like snails.
That's really interesting. You know, the opossum is one of the studies that's currently going on is whether that protein that I spoke of in their blood system could really create an anti-venom. How great would that be?
Oh, wow.
The fact that they like snails is essential for many gardens and some for not. So for those hunters that we have that come around our area, coming for snails, you know, because they want to cook them up, they have somebody to compete with in the possum. So,
I prefer the possum to eating a snail.
Yeah, exactly. They have competition. But they're also big roach eaters. And one other thing that's essential for them is they eat a lot of ticks. So my question would be, if we have a big tick infestation, maybe we can gather as many opossums as we can and put them in there like we do with the goat program. Take care of all the goats. It'll take care of all the ticks and we won't have Lyme disease. I think
Good.
I'm gonna ask for that to happen. Yeah, it's something in their blood protein that allows them to eat the ticks up, and they and again with some snakes as well. They can eat upwards of different types of snakes, but something like 10 or 12. But the venom is in rattlesnakes, in our western rattlesnake.
Norma,
Yes.
can you talk about urban coyotes?
What do you want to talk about?
Well, like we see them in Torrance, we see them in PV. If they only live 180 days, are we seeing the young, the old? Do you know anything about that?
I'll speak to some of that just from some of the folks that I know that are working on projects and helping to kind of displace, eradicate, study their behaviors. You're seeing the evolution of the families, because they're very family driven. Those kits learn from parents. The parents then will take them and distribute as far as they can. And we're seeing more urbanization because we're growing like crazy, right? So we're moving and shifting, and those animals are coming down from their natural habitats and they're taking over. What's happening is they're becoming habituated to everyone, because folks are getting comfortable with how they live, as they should be, and they forget that they leave food out, maybe their dog food or their cat food. And it's not to blame humans, it's help them understand that the animal itself is a predatory animal, and it's hungry, and it's coming down from its natural environment for a reason. If its natural environment is no longer supporting it, say it's a high drought season, or it's an environment that has new growth. Maybe there's been bulldozers there pushing them out because there's new hotels or new apartments going up. They're going to be shifting their movement, and they're moving all over the place. New York was trying to eradicate theirs out of that little island. The coyotes found their way there. They're incredibly wily and smart. So for us to have them as we do, it ebbs and flows through the season. So it goes seasonality wise. If they're not having a lot of food, they're not going to have a lot of births. If it was a great season and there was a lot of growth and a lot of nurturing and nourishing food out there, they're going to be a population that's blowing up. And so we're seeing a little bit more of that. At night, I think 2 weeks ago was the last night I heard a really big pack up. And the last 2 years,
About 2 minutes.
first time I've been hearing packing up. We never used to have that. They're recognized as solitary, like all the canids, all the foxes. They're not usually in big packs like that here. You might hear about that in their normal settings and maybe a desert or an environment where they're accustomed to it. But now we're starting to see that. They're teaching their young. So those little young yips and the kits that are going to grow up to now go back to what they taught them. They're going to teach them, oh, go over to the golf course, or this street has a lot of feral cats. So it's one of the things that they're looking at is how to move them out of those environments by taking away the food source. So then you come on and eradicate the feral cats program, or the opossums and the skunks and the other animals that they will prey upon. They'll prey upon their young, they'll prey upon them. So they are moving more than they ever have in the last decade. And it's a problem all over the 50 states. So most 49 states. So it's a big problem. It's a good question.
Okay, anything else, anyone?
Norma, is your book for sale in the Los Terrenos Point Vicente gift shop?
No, not anytime soon. Eventually, maybe.
Where is it for sale?
There hasn't been one. I have one that's been produced and done, but I haven't gotten it out to be sold yet. I'm still fixing the things that I like to tweak, but it'll be eventual. And hopefully I'll be able to create a relationship with the bookshop that they'll let me put it in there at Point Vicente.
Oh, I would really like to get your book. So just let us, let all the docents know when it's available.
Sure. Well, I know I ran through a lot of this and there's a lot of questions. If you have additional questions, feel free to reach out. You can contact me through Point Vicente's listing and I'll be glad to answer any other questions. Keep in mind something with a lot of these animals, as much as we all are lovers of nature. And I hope that the PowerPoint presented that in a way to kind of get you excited about maybe going out and doing more of what you do and loving nature, but take a sketch pad and go get some watercolor pencils and start drawing around you and doing that so that you can bring that in during this ridiculous, strange COVID time. So those little nuances I know are helping me to cope because it's a difficult environment to be in. But to think about just a nature walk, not an exercise walk, just a sound walk, a sensory walk, go out and listen and take in those things that we have all around us. Not as much as them being a nuisance, but more in turn of you guys being together. And hopefully you're doing a little bit of that while we're out and about, and as much as we can be, and or as little as we can be. So thank you for the time.
Yeah, especially for your thoughts.